Hey everybody, it is Dean Z, and today we have a very special episode. Why is it special? First, it is a reboot of an episode I did way back in my very first season about medians and how they work, and I am updating it, refreshing it, trying to get all this in everyone's head and maybe say it even a little better with any luck than I did the first time. It is also a special episode because for those of you who have never seen me live and in person, this is the one where you're going to find out exactly how short I am. So look forward to that. All right. LSATs and undergraduate GPAs, or UGPAs, as we in the biz like to call it. Those are the only two metrics we have in law school admissions. These are the two things that everyone wants to know about a school, that get put in rankings, that, you know, students fixate on, yada, yada, yada. And they are important. I'm not going to pretend they're not important, but they have limitations, and the way they work is often not clear to students. And so I'm going to hope to try to explain that to you, and maybe I'll be bringing you down to earth, or maybe I'll be giving you hope. I don't know. It depends on where the starting point is, but let's dive in. First, I want to talk about why do admissions offices even care about these numbers? Two reasons, one of which is substantive and one of which is less than substantive, I guess I'd say. The substantive reason, LSAT and GPA actually do a fair amount of work toward predicting your first year law school grades. And that's all they are. That's all the LSAT is designed to predict, is your first year law school grades. It's not designed to predict how you're going to do by the time you graduate. It's not designed to predict how you're going to do on the bar. It's not designed to predict what kind of a lawyer you're going to be. It's only for this one thing, first year grades, and really it shouldn't be being used or thought of for any other purpose. And it does a fair amount of work toward doing that prediction. If you add the undergraduate GPA to it, it does even more work. So that's why it's a good measure for law school admissions officers to try and see, will you succeed in our particular environment? I spent a lot of time in preparing for this episode trying to create a sentence that would quantify the extent to which the LSAT does predictive work, without using phrases like, it has a reliability coefficient of 0.9, because who wants to hear that? But I could not come up with anything that was precise and yet also clear. It turns out you can't talk about statistics and psychometrics without being like really too numerical for my taste. So I'm just skipping that, and I'm going to say it's a fairly strong indicator. It varies from school to school how strong it is, and it varies from person to person. So there are people for whom whatever their LSAT and GPA is, they'll get predicted to have a 1L performance of whatever, and that's exactly what their 1L performance is. But there are many, many other people who both outperform whatever their numbers predict or underperform whatever their numbers predict. So it's a very imperfect couple of metrics, and yet it is the best we have, and it does a solid job. So that's the substantive reason why an admissions office is going to want to look at those two numbers. The non-substantive reason is because LSAT scores in particular, but also GPAs, are often seen by outsiders as a proxy for a law school's quality. Actually not, I shouldn't say outsiders. They're used by people in general, like whether it's the students, the applicants, the faculty at a law school, the alumni, legal employers. Lots of people look to a school's average LSAT and GPA and say, oh, this is a solid school, or this is less than solid school, or whatever it is. So schools, of course, want to be thought of as good schools, and they know that this is how these numbers are perceived. So there's a lot of incentive to have high average LSATs and GPAs for your incoming class, completely independent of the fact that they also do some work for us that is important and substantive in terms of trying to assess a person's academic abilities. So of course, you as an applicant likely know this. You likely know that it has some predictive value. You likely know that there's, let's call them superficial reasons for caring about these scores too. And you tend to get a little overly fixated on them. Like people tend to look at these numbers and think these numbers are my destiny, like your own personal numbers vis-a-vis a school's average numbers. And in fact, what tends to happen is people look at them and see them as a floor. So using Michigan as an example, our average LSAT is at 171 and our average GPA is a 3.8 and change, and people look at that and think, if I don't have a 171 and a 3.8 and change, I'm never getting in there. And that is completely erroneous, and that's what I really want to dive into today. So this is the part where you should start paying attention. First, I've talked about average LSATs and GPAs for a school, right? I should explain that there are three kinds of averages. The first one that I'll talk about is called the modal average, and that is in any list of numbers, the number that appears most frequently, that is called the mode. And literally nobody uses that for any kind of average meaningfully standing alone. Like I've never seen anybody say, but the mode is blah, 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 and as part of an argument. So forget all about the mode. Don't think about the mode. But the other two are the principal kinds of averages we use. One is the mean, and that's the one that when people just say average, they're usually talking about a mean. But a median is also an average. What's the difference? The mean is when you have a list of numbers, you add them all up, you divide by however many numbers are in the set, and that is your mean. A median is when you have a list of numbers, lowest to highest or highest to lowest, and you pick the midpoint, and that's the median. That's that average. Law schools and the entire industry of rankings and whoever, we use medians. We do not use means, and that is very important. And I'm going to show you why by going to the whiteboard behind me. This is when you're going to find out how short I am. Okay. Let's look at this set of numbers first. They're identical. There's 5 numbers here. This is the median. There's 2 numbers above, 2 numbers below, and 1 number in the middle is the median. Here, same set of numbers, add them up, divide by 5, and you get 162. So here, the mean and the median are identical. Let's go to the next set of numbers. It's again identical, but here, look at that, the median's a 170 in this list, but here, if you add these up and divide by 5, the median is a significantly lower, the mean is a significantly lower 166. Let's look at one more set. Here, if you've got one set that's identical to this, so again, you've got the 170 median. Here, instead of 171, I added 2 180s. You have to have 2 180s instead of these 2 171s for this to add up to 169.6, which would round to a mean of 170. So that's quite significantly different. If you were a law school that wanted to have an average score of 170, and you're going with means, and you've admitted a 158 and a 160, well, you got to get 2 180s to make up for that. Not if you are doing a median. So let's talk a little bit more about that. I feel like a real teacher right now. I'm actually going to read this part because it's all about numbers again, and it gets confusing. So let's just go ahead and read it, okay? So if you're using the median, the range of your numbers matters not at all. All that matters is what is the midpoint in whatever set you have, right? So in the second example, right here, if I change this number to 120, which is the lowest score you can get on the LSAT, the median here is still 170. If I change this number to 180, median is still 170. So you can see the range can be enormous, and it doesn't matter at all for what the median ends up being. If I change this to 180, I don't know, I can't do that math on the fly, but I will point out that, so 120 is 50 points lower than the desired mean of 170, right? Well, that means to balance out the 120, you'd need to have a 220, right? Well, there is no 220. 180 is as good as it gets. So whatever, your mean becomes much lower if you start trying to have a very wide range. It's just necessarily going to bring down your mean. So what does that mean for you as the applicant? That gives you a certain amount of freedom. If we were using means, there's just a limited number of people at the top end of the pool. Like 172, the people who have 172 and above, that's only 3% of the whole pool. So you can't, if you were using means, you couldn't admit lower LSAT scores and depend on getting a whole lot of people with high LSAT scores, because there just aren't that many people out there to do that, right? So just put that out of your head, because we're working with medians. It doesn't matter. So when you're working with medians, I can go, I can admit anybody with whatever low score, so long as I think they're doing the work, and I can be very happy to get them. And then all I have to do to balance out that one extremely low score is have someone who is at my median or above, whatever, but it could just be as low as at my median, and I'm still hitting my median. Does that make sense? I hope so. I can't hear you. Let's hope it does. By the way, I should say I'm focusing on the LSAT because I think that's just an easier number. It's like 170, 150, whatever. But the same lesson, of course, applies to the GPA too. In any event, admissions officers have a whole lot of reasons why they don't want to be hemmed in by the numbers. Everything that is interesting and exciting about an applicant is everything that isn't the numbers. We use the numbers to say, can you do the work? But beyond that, what do I care? We've already talked about how the numbers aren't perfect predictors of 1L performance. We've already talked about how lots of people, they're not perfect predictors at all for certain individuals. So, but what's interesting is what have you done with your life? Who are you? Are you fun to be around? Are you great in a classroom? Are you very articulate? Are you great with doing math in your head? I suppose that could be useful in some schools, blah, blah, blah. There's all kinds of characteristics that someone might have that are just not going to be captured by the LSAT or the GPA. So admissions officers want to be free to admit people like that whose numbers may not be at or above their medians. And because we have medians, we have the flexibility to do that. Now there is a downside, a flip side to this that is perhaps less advantageous for the applicant. Let's say there's a school with a 170 and a 3.7 median. You might think that if you have a 169 and a, what did I just say, 37, a 369, right, GPA, you're right there. Your numbers are almost identical to their medians. But under is under. So for all intents and purposes, a 169 is no different than a 139, right, in terms of hitting the median. Maybe it might make a difference. That might be a number where a school might think, I don't know if you can do the work at this institution. But if that's not the case, it doesn't matter to them whether you're a 169 or a 139. The same is true for the GPA. So that might be frustrating. That might be disappointing, and I 100% get that. So that's the downside of using a median. So bottom line, if I'm an admissions officer and I think certain below median numbers are reflective of someone who can still absolutely do the work, then I don't really care whether it's 1 point below or 10 points below or whatever it is. It's all the same to me because I'm still going to be able to hit my median. Now, a school has to be careful, though, about admitting too many people who are under their medians, particularly if they are under both medians. So if you are what the denizens of Reddit call a splitter, one of your numbers is at or above the median and one is below, you have lots of opportunity there. You're helping the school with one of their medians, right? And they can just admit somebody with the reverse to help, solidify the other median, right? And of course, there are lots of people who are at or above both medians, and those people are sitting pretty. But for being in terms of their numbers. Obviously, everything else is still on the table. But for being under on both numbers, schools are kind of limited in how many people they can admit, or else they're just anchoring themselves at a lower median and they're never going to hit whatever their targets are. The extent to which schools are driven by this will vary a lot. There are definitely schools out there that admit almost no one who is under both of their medians. There are schools whose missions are just quite different. They don't care as much about their medians, and they might be admitting lots of people who are under both their medians. Then there's schools in the middle, and I would put Michigan in this category, where, yeah, we care about our medians, but we also are very interested in having a certain kind of student body that, you know, is going to excel in a lot of different ways. And, you know, so roughly I'd say about 10% of every class is under both of our medians. Now, that means if you're in that position, what should you do? Taking it all together, here's my advice. When you're thinking about where to apply, you should be looking at a school's medians from the immediate preceding year. They're probably going to try to target something pretty similar. If you are at or above at least one number, I think it is absolutely reasonable to apply to that school and think, well, it's not your numbers that are going to hold you back. Doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get in, but you've got a shot. This is, of course, putting to the side the possibility of a number that is so low, as I said, that it makes a school think, I don't know if this person can do the work. But assuming that's not what we're talking about, as long as you're at or above one median, I think it's absolutely reasonable for you to think, I got a good shot. If you're at or above both, you have an even better shot. So if you are below both, I also think it is absolutely reasonable to be applying, but you don't want to make all your schools be in that category unless you feel like, I only want to go to these kinds of schools, and if I can't get in, I'm going to go off to some other career. That's totally valid. That's a reasonable way to think about it. But if you really, the only way to be a lawyer is to go to law school. So if you want to maximize your chances of going to law school, don't apply to exclusively schools where you are below both medians. And if you are applying, you know, there's like, here's these 3 schools that I really, really think would be a great fit for me. I'm very interested in what they do. I'm going to apply to them. Make sure, for the love of everything, make sure you are maximizing all other aspects of your application, right? Do a great job on your personal statement. Really put work into it. Take every opportunity to write an optional essay. Make sure to find recommenders who say, yes, I can write you a strongly supportive letter of recommendation. Make sure you have had interesting work and that you've done some extracurriculars and that all of that is reflected interestingly and clearly on your resume. Give yourself every opportunity, because if you are just applying to schools where you're under both of their medians and you do kind of a sloppy job on your application and you aren't making it clear why you think they should be admitting you and what you have to offer, you're not going to have a very good chance of getting in. I mean, I will say, of course, every year the pool is different. So some years, like last year was a very competitive pool. If that's followed by a year that isn't as competitive, then schools will have to drop their medians because there won't be enough people in the pool. And so maybe you have an opportunity that you don't know about just looking at last year's medians. So take everything I'm saying here with that grain of salt. But in general, this is really solid advice, I promise you. Shoot your shot, but make sure you're in a good position when you're making that shot. I think that's a sports metaphor. Was that a sports metaphor? Sort of. Dustin says sort of. Okay. One last bit of advice on this. Merit aid is usually predicated on LSATs and GPAs. So that means that if you are below both of these numbers and you are admitted, there's a pretty substantial chance that you are not going to get merit aid. You might get some, but not very much. You might get need-based aid if a school offers it and you are considered needy by whatever their measure is. But you should wrestle with the possibility that these schools that are your dream schools are schools at which you're going to be paying full tuition. It may not be worth it to you, right? You may think the difference between that dream school and another school that's giving me money is not big enough for me to take on that level of debt or to make that level of investment, and that's a perfectly reasonable decision to make. In my mind, that's a decision for down the road. Like, you know, if these are your dream schools, I'd say apply, see what happens. It's always in your control to say, nope, I'm not going there. But if you think you want to have that choice, there's only one way to find out, and that is to apply. But that's just a little bit of a warning that the medians also play a role in that process too. Bottom line, don't hear me saying the numbers don't matter, but do hear me saying that there's flexibility there and there's opportunities that, just focusing on those numbers as a floor isn't going to show you. So, all right, I hope that is helpful. Good luck. Let me know what questions you have. And I'm sorry that was such a numbers-heavy episode. Now, though, let's talk about words a little bit. I was feeling very dry on the question of grammar this morning. I was trying to think, what do I want to talk about grammar-wise? And I wasn't coming up with anything. So I texted 3 women who are great lawyers and great writers, really good friends of mine who love words and love language. And I was like, what's your grammar beef? What can I use? And one of them, and the other 2 agreed, said, don't start sentences with however. She just thinks it's a dull way to write. It doesn't grab anybody's attention. It is a loser. Don't do it. And I think that's probably right. I sometimes do it, but certainly don't want to lean on it too much. And I think usually a sentence is better constructed if you can move the however further in and not begin with however. It is sort of a mood killer. You know what I'm saying? All right. I hope that's useful. I'm so tired of talking. I hope you are not tired, fatally tired anyway, of listening. I appreciate you watching this. Please put your comments below. Send us emails to law.jd.admissions@umich.edu. Put blog in the subject line. Let us know how we can help. And thank you, Dustin, for setting up something where I could use the whiteboard. Love that. And wherever you go, go blue.